Hello, good
How are you?
morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for taking the time to join. Sorry, we had some webinar issue link, some accessibility, so we have to change the link. Uh,
Don't worry.
uh, okay, so do we want to test out your screen to make sure that we have your slides so we can
Yes,
see?
so that's a good idea.
How is the weather in Rochester?
So it's it's good, though the weather forecast, and please let me know if you can see my screen. The weather forecast for next week is very scary. I suppose
Really?
you in North Dakota you also expect probably a very cold weather.
Yeah, that's we're used to, it's not new for us. It's
Ah,
been mild and, you know, we are North Dakotans, right? So we know what the weather is. So I think, but it's probably terrible for you guys,
so we probably are living in the same world.
Yeah. So, but just to give you, we've been doing this webinar for the last 2 years. We've received good reception, and also, this is one way for me to get to network with folks and get to know the area, and probably identify some proposals that we can go after, and some joint initiatives. So, thank you so much for taking the time this morning to do this for us. And let's see, Harish, do you want to share the speaker's bio so I can introduce the speaker and then we can get started? Do you have any questions, Dr. Hanif? 45 to 50 minutes is the talk. Maybe the reminder last 10 minutes or so, we can do the Q&A sessions.
Yes, that sounds good to me. Yes, thank you.
Super. So we can get started. It's 10:59. Good morning, everyone, for today's distinguished webinar series in AI and cybersecurity. Today's title is Beyond Cryptography, Challenges and Solutions for Quantum-Resistant Protocols in Constrained Systems. Our distinguished speaker is Dr. Hanif Rehbari. He's an assistant professor in the College of Computing and Information Science at Rochester Institute of Technology. He is also an affiliated faculty member of the ESL Global Cybersecurity Institute and the Department of Computer Engineering at RIT. His research focuses on enhancing the security of wireless and networked ecosystems, specifically in the areas such as connected vehicles, leakage of transmission attributes at the physical layer, spectrum coexistence, quantum resistance, and AI-driven digital twins for security. He's a co-inventor on 3 US patents, a co-author for more than 30 peer-reviewed papers, and the recipient of an NSF Career Award in 2023. Dr. Hanif, it's a great honor to have you as part of the webinar series at UND. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Prakash, and thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. I'm going to share my screen. Yes, thanks again for the introduction. I'm going to talk about some of my research on challenges and solutions for quantum resistance in constrained networks. So just a little bit of introduction. So I lead the wireless and IoT security and privacy lab at RIT, in short, WISP lab, which includes several PhD and undergraduate students, and also it's the home to a testbed. We call it servers on wings, including software-defined radios, drones, and other equipments, especially for connected vehicles. So my team tackles multiple research area problems in spectrum coexistence, in connected vehicle security, in quantum resistant protocols, in AI for security and security of AI in wireless systems specifically, and some educational activities and using digital tools or other means. So what I'm going to focus mainly in this talk is the intersection of three main areas: connected vehicle security, applied cryptography, specifically quantum-resistant protocols, and the role of AI in security of wireless ecosystem. So without further ado, let me get to the details. So you probably have heard about perhaps a decade-long race or effort, collective effort in the community towards a quantum-resistant future. So I use this illustration just to see, like, this is an effort that has been going over the past decade, if not longer, to get to the future that is resistant against quantum. But what does a quantum-resistant future mean? So we are dealing with the threat, the quantum threat. The problem is that quantum computers are evolving, and then once they are becoming strong enough, quantum attacks launched by the attackers who use quantum computers will obsolete current public key cryptography, which is used in many of today's applications to secure in many of those applications. In fact, NIST and IETF are pushing to make ecosystems quantum resistant, and that's part of the effort that is like the effort or race, if you will, over the past decade in the community is initiated by NIST. And more recently, the legislation body, the Congress, and even a presidential memo required preparing for an immediate transition to post-quantum or to quantum-resistant future. So available data show or point to the metric to next 1 or 2 decades for when these quantum computers would be capable of breaking public key cryptography. So this is like an imminent or near future threat. So I looked at some of the latest IBM numbers and predictions. IBM is one of the leading companies to build quantum computers, and it showed the continuous or exponential growth in generating gates for quantum chips. So IBM actually anticipates that by 2033, it will have chips with that contains in the orders of 1,000 logical qubits and 1 billion gates, which would be enough to break some of the hashing algorithms, and it would not take longer to also then break some of the more significant, more critical parts of these systems. And as you know, hash algorithms or secure hash algorithms are part of public key cryptographic systems. So the threat is coming. It's anticipated that maybe a decade or two we'll have this threat, and that's why we have that collective effort at the federal level all the way to the industry in standardization and research community to build towards quantum resistant future. And that's why actually this past year, so we just entered 2025, but in 2024, NIST standardized its first set of post-quantum algorithms, which include 1 encryption algorithm, 2 digital signature algorithm, and they also are considering 1 additional digital signature algorithm for standardization in 2025. These are proposed or standardized to help transition the systems from the classic cryptography, classic public key cryptography to quantum resistant or classical encryption to quantum resistant encryption. And in fact, NIST continues to look for more digital signature algorithms because that's the digital signature algorithm today, or the ones that are standardized, are not good enough with regards to certain characteristics. And I'm going to talk more about that, why they are looking for even better digital signature algorithms. So we are in the community, and specifically in my research, we're trying to answer 2 key research questions. And the first one is that, well, when people develop or the researchers develop post-quantum algorithms, how they are going to select these algorithms, how they're going to evaluate different proposals, different algorithms to be adopted or standardized on the algorithm design side. And then on the system side, how our future systems and protocols are going to be basically designed that use this algorithm. So these algorithms should be used in systems. So First, how these algorithms are going to be designed or are being designed and evaluated. And second, how they need to be used or incorporated in the systems and protocols. So these are the main research questions that I focus on in my research. So according to NIST, there are three main design requirements for the algorithms. The first one, of course, perhaps the most important, the most trivial one, is the security properties, whether or not these algorithms are going to be robust or secure against quantum attackers. So they look at whether or not the attackers would have enough resources to break these algorithms. The second criteria that focus on or requirement is that whether or not the algorithms would have a desired characteristics, not necessarily security characteristics, but whether or not they are simple enough, they are flexible enough, and they can be adopted by real systems. And thirdly, they look at the cost and performance of these algorithms in terms of like, what is the computational efficiency, whether or not they can be run efficiently on different hardware, different architectures, whether or not it would require a lot of memory in terms of RAM or gate counts. And also they look at whether or not these algorithms would incur high transmission cost in terms of transmitting public keys and signatures, or even sometimes the ciphertext, if it is for encryption. So among these three main design requirements, what is, I guess, more interesting for researchers in networking and wireless ecosystem are like whether or not these algorithms would be adoptable or simple enough, and whether or not these would have reasonable transmission cost. The reason is, and here is the key information here, the standardized PQ algorithms that I just introduced, those that were standardized in 2024, they all, without exception, have either large public key size, a large certificate, or a large signature size. So when we think about public key systems, digital signature systems, the sender has to sign a message and send that signature of the message. So if the signature of that message is long, it would incur high transmission cost. If the public key used for that crypto system is sent along with the signature for the receiver to verify that signature, that would also create a lot of transmission cost. And sometimes the sender also has to send a certificate. And if the certificate is long, again, it further would increase the transmission cost. And if the transmission cost is going to be significant, that would prevent the adoption of these algorithms. So let me tell you more about that. So specifically, when we look at constrained networks, the networks that are constrained either in their bandwidth, or they have some delay constraints or frame size constraint, or they have some reliability constraint in terms of how much packet loss they can tolerate. It turns out that this transmission cost, because of the large size of the signatures, large size of the public key or the certificate, is a significant barrier for such networks, for constrained networks. An example of such constrained but critical networks could include connected vehicles, could include the communication from the ground to air, or air to ground, or from the sea to the land, or land to the sea. You can also think of satellite communications. You can think of communication across continents, long distance communication. You can also think of communication at the battlefield. These are all examples of critical applications that are somewhat constrained in maybe bandwidth, delay, frame size, or with regards to reliability. The transmission cost for post-quantum algorithms for this standardized algorithm is a significant barrier for adoption in such networks. So that's the main argument I have in this talk. So I'll give you two examples. The first one, I'm going to be brief on that for the interest of time. Second one, I will talk in more detail. So the first example is in securing IPsec. So as you know, IPsec is a protocol to secure the IP connection at layer 3 of networking. Basically, it's used to establish a virtual private network, or in short, VPN. In order to establish IPsec, there is a protocol called IKE, or Internet Key Exchange Protocol. And the role of this protocol is to rapidly establish security association. So it is important that this connection is established quickly, because the latency or the delay is a constraint. You want to establish a connection, let's say in air to space communication, let's say in banking, let's say in battlefield, let's say in healthcare. So we need to have a very quick establishment of the IP network, of IPsec. And so IKE protocol is designed for that purpose. But in our research, we show that adoption of post-quantum algorithms, even with some intelligent designs by IETF, when the network is not very reliable, meaning that there would be high packet loss or the bandwidth would be limited, in such cases, the latency of establishing connection on average would be 12 seconds, which is significantly several orders of magnitude slower than the IPsec connection establishment today. And that would prevent many real-time and time-sensitive applications. And the reason is, so if you look at the figure to the left, this is the current IKE protocol, in which it exchanges only 4 messages between an initiator and a responder in order to establish a secure connection or secure association. Only 4 messages. And some of these messages include the certificate or the public key of one of the parties. If we now replace the classical digital signatures in this exchange with post-quantum digital signatures, see what happens. Because of the huge size of these messages, the protocol has to fragment the message into multiple packets, because every packet has a limit or maximum size. For example, at IP layer, the maximum transmit unit is only 1500 byte. And so the messages are, the signatures or the public keys are much longer, much larger than this limit. So the protocol has no way but to break one message into multiple pieces, as you can see, probably will be able to see on the figure to the right, that there are fragments 1 out of 3, 2 out of 3, 3 out of 3, because these are fragments of the message. And then 4 messages to the left is replaced by 44 messages to the right. And then when we have packet losses or limited bandwidth, that would require a lot of retransmissions. And then at the end of the day, we observe in our experiments, some conducted over the continent or over the Atlantic, from the US to Europe, that the total delay would increase by 12 seconds on average, which is quite significant. So that shows why, and a clear and perhaps a concerning example of transmission, of the barrier that this transmission cost would create for the adoption of such solutions, such algorithms. But the second example I want to talk longer about, or in more details, is in connected vehicles. So connectivity is a technology that vehicles can talk to each other directly without relying on the network or base stations. Let me introduce this technology a little bit further. So this technology, connected vehicle, relies on vehicle-to-vehicle communication, which is a direct wireless communication between vehicles intended for safety, because it's anticipated, based on some studies, that V2V communication can prevent 600,000 crashes every year just in the US. Basically, it will save a lot of lives. It also has benefits like, it would improve the efficiency of transportation. And for all these benefits, mainly especially for the safety, this communication should be very quick because this application is extremely delay sensitive. And by that, I mean, like, the communication should be, or exchange of the packets should be within, or generation and exchange should be within 100 to 500 milliseconds. So it's pretty extremely delay sensitive. So the vehicles have to quickly send messages. Let me show you a little bit more about this application. So suppose that I have this intersection. You see two white cars approaching the intersection, and there is a green trash truck or truck. So when these two white vehicles want to approach the intersection, of course, if they don't look at each other or they don't realize each other, they would collide, which is not something we want. So when they move, the drivers try to be careful, but because of that truck, the view is obscured. And so they won't be able to see each other. They won't be able to see each other. They keep going. And then they may actually collide. And that could be a deadly collision. So what V2V is trying to provide is like, because the vehicle can talk to each other, because they can send safety messages over the wireless channel, even though the drivers or the sensors or cameras or even LiDARs on the vehicles would be able to detect each other, the signals would be exchanged. So one of the vehicles would realize that there is another vehicle, in this case, the vehicle to the left. It would yield the road. It will not keep going. So unless the other vehicle go first, and this way a collision would be prevented. So that's why it is such a safety critical technology. So in order to have this technology, of course, the message that this vehicle sends should be secure. And therefore, there is a V2V authentication mechanism. So suppose that these are two vehicles are going to approach that intersection, and there is a building that blocks the view of these two vehicles. So they want to send messages. We call them basic safety message, or in short, BSM, in which they let each other, or through which they let each other about their direction, or where they are, or their location. So we want this message to be secure because we don't want adversaries or malicious users send incorrect information and cause problems like accidents or traffic jam or other unintended consequences. So this BSMs would be encapsulated in a data unit called Secure Protocol Data Unit, or in short SPDU, which contains, of course, that BSM, but also a digital signature of that message, so that the receiving vehicle can verify that message, and the signature, so a digital certificate and a digital signature. So the digital certificate itself contains the public key of the vehicle, so that the receiving vehicle can verify the digital signature of that vehicle, as well as a digital signature signed by the certificate authority, or CA, to ensure the authentication of the certificate itself. So an SPDU has these four components. As you see, it contains one public key and contains two digital signatures. One digital signatures by the CA for the certificate, and the second digital signature by the vehicle for the BSM message, which in this case, it says I'm approaching the intersection. So when the sending vehicle sent that information, the receiving vehicle receives that, and it first has to make sure that the certificate is valid, meaning that it has been issued by the certificate authority. So it verifies the digital signature by the CA. Once it's verified, it checks the validity of the signature by the vehicle using the public key. And once it has verified not only the certificate, but also the digital signature of the vehicle, it then would go and accept the BSM, because it's verified that it is coming from a legitimate, trustworthy source. And that would prevent perhaps collisions, as you saw in an example earlier. So that's why B2B authentication is important to support the safety benefits of B2B. But as I alluded to earlier, when quantum computers arrive, they would break the digital signatures in V2V. Because digital signatures I introduced to you in the previous slide, they rely on classic public key cryptography, or specifically in this case, elliptic curves, ECDSA, to sign those messages or sign the certificate. So once quantum computers break ECDSA, an attacker could be able to forge signatures, issue bogus certificates, and cause all sort of serious safety risks for the system. We know that NIST is standardizing these algorithms. That's what happened a few months ago with the first set of standardized algorithm. The problem, though, is that V2V is so constrained that it cannot easily adopt any of these algorithms. So what to do? Let me get more into some numbers or some of how severe the problem is. So in this slide, you see that in the left-hand side, you see that SPDU that I introduced earlier. In the right-hand side, you see the size of the messages depending on which of the signature algorithm we use. So ECDSA is the classic one. The others are post-quantum algorithms. And we also have studied one other algorithm that is not yet approved by NIST, but it's being considered for standardization. As you can see, the size of such messages, when we use either of the post-quantum algorithm, significantly exceeds the size of the message when we just use the classical ECDSA. And why is it a problem? Because let's say in one of the technologies for wireless communication between vehicles, or one of the V2V technologies called dedicated short-range communication, or in short DSRC, there is a limit on how large the packet could be. And so when we consider that limit versus the size of each of these messages, we see that without exception, all those 4 algorithms would generate packet sizes larger than what it is allowed. So then we need to do something on the system side, on the protocol side, in order to be able to use these algorithms and secure future connected vehicles. And a side note here is that, when we start to look at this technology or this issue, we are looking at DSRC. Those who are familiar with connected vehicles know that it is being now replaced by a technology called cellular CV2X or CV2X. And the limit, this packet size limit you see for DSRC is going to be even worse. It's going to be more constrained on their CV2X. So either of these technologies would have to deal with this problem. So when we first identified this problem, we reported that to NIST. And luckily, NIST listened to us, and of course a few others, to actually put aside some of these algorithms for standardization. So if I go back to the previous slide, you see here that Falcon, one of those 4 algorithms, appears to be more promising, whereas like Sphinx is a non-starter. So then in the standardization report by NIST, they actually favored Falcon besides dilithium as one of the ones that are standardizing, in part because of our findings, because we argue that it is not going to be adoptable if you keep using, let's say, the Sphinx algorithm. But we did not stop there. So we identified the problem. We showed that, how significant it is, but then we tried to solve that problem. So V2V is uniquely challenging, is perhaps more challenging than most other constrained networks. So in this diagram, we showed this, like, in the x-axis, we have the latency, how delay sensitive, how latency sensitive application is. And in the y-axis, we showed the limit on the side in terms of the packet size. And as you can see, either with regard to latency, that 100 to 500 millisecond latency, or from the size perspective, V2V is more constrained than most of other constraint systems, like for 6G communication, for TLS, and so on and so forth. So perhaps the most difficult one to tackle, but also one of the most safety critical applications. So what we have been able to do is that we analyze the quantum threat levels, meaning that what would be different priorities or different types of attacks in terms of their priorities that we have to deal with. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Then we design a hybrid authentication protocol. By hybrid, I mean we design a protocol that supports both classic and post-quantum authentication protocols in case post-quantum algorithm turn out to be not secure in next few years. So we still have the classical one. And then we actually realize that without using AI, we are not going to be able to support that algorithm. The third approach, or the third main contribution we did is like we proved our solution that I'm going to introduce shortly, and conducted extensive hardware experiments to show that it works in practice. It's going to work and help future connected vehicles and future V2V. And overall, we proposed a practical, secure, and experimentally validated post-quantum solution for V2V. The source code is also available online. It's open source for the community for further exploration of this area. So, but why really again, we focus on connected vehicles, even though the quantum threat is perhaps 1 or 2 decades away. So we know that based on the available data, the quantum threat is not going to be a real threat, maybe until next decade. But at the same time, the vehicles we use have the lifetime between 13 to 15 years, according to the Department of Transportation statistics. This is the average year in the US of the vehicles. And so if auto manufacturers are manufacturing vehicles today, those vehicles would be on the road until we will likely have those quantum threats. So we have to fix the problem today in order to protect the vehicles that would be on the roadways at that time. So we realized, okay, well, there is a significant constraint. So perhaps we have to think about a phased transition to a post-quantum era or the quantum resistant era. So quantum computers can't break much of ECDSA today, but there are different phases the attackers can think of. So as you remember, there were 2 critical message elements that have digital signatures for V2V. So one was the signature of the BSM itself. The second was this digital signature for the certificate. It turns out that in V2V technology, the certificate of a vehicle would be valid for 1 week, whereas the certificate for this BSM would be valid for only 30 seconds. Or sorry, the signature for the BSM would be valid only for 30 seconds. So if a quantum computer is able to break a BSM signature within 30 seconds, that computer would also be able to break the signature for the digital certificate. And that would be more risky because the digital certificate is going to be valid for a longer period of time. And so cracking that or breaking that would pose the system to more risk over a longer period of time. And also we know that it takes, from the quantum computing perspective, a quantum attacker would be able to first break digital certificate signature in 1 week if he's given maybe multiple days to break it. But it requires larger quantum computers to be able to break a signature in just 30 seconds. So we see that there are 2 different levels of importance. So protecting the signature of the digital certificate is more important because it's going to be valid for a longer period of time and it's going to be more eminent than protecting the signature of the BSM. In other words, certificate forgery is more eminent. And for that reason, in an attempt to see, okay, well, we have that frame size limit or packet size limit. If you are going to protect both signatures using post-quantum algorithms, it's not going to be practical. Therefore, we decide to protect the more critical one, at least for the next several years, until so that we can, until like the quantum computers become capable enough to break a signature within 30 seconds. And for that reason, we came up with this idea of a partially hybrid solution in which we protect only the digital signature of the certificate, at least for this next several years, if not the next decade, until we find a solution for other parts, which I'm going to get to in a second. So that's then our solution, or one of our solutions, is that we're going to partially use an authentication protocol that is partially hybrid. Partial in the sense that there is going to be a PQ signature to protect the certificate, but there would be no post-quantum signature to protect the BSM yet. So, and that's partial, right? So it's a hybrid solution, a hybrid protocol for the digital certificate part. It's not yet hybrid for the BSM. But even supporting this partial hybrid design is challenging. Again, we deal with a very constrained system. So we observed that, well, even the PQ signature for this certificate is going to be too large. And then something we notice is that, this technology allows the certificates to be sent only every fifth SPD or every fifth BSM. The certificates are not required to be sent on every message, but they have to be sent in every one out of 5 messages. So that opened up an opportunity for us to look at whether we can actually fragment that hybrid certificate, which can't be fit into one message, even with a partial design. We fragment it into across 5 different SPDUs and send each of those fragments in one of those SPDUs in order to minimize the overall message size. So once we apply this fragmentation approach and across different algorithms, we see what we can see here. If you look at the top of the figure, we have that message size limit. With the fragmentation in our partially hybrid design, not a fully hybrid, but partially hybrid design, we are now able to actually support all the 5 or all the 4 post-quantum algorithms using fragmentation. Like you see, there are 5 fragments because we are able to, from the safety perspective, it's okay if we send the certificate once in every 5 messages. So we fragment it, send each piece in one of the BSMs, and then it would be fine. Then we start to test it in practice, and it turns out that even though we can focus on Falcon and the message size is going to be reasonable, if you look at the first piece, is still much longer than the first piece on ECDSA because it contains some additional information for the first fragment. And that longer message is still problematic. It's wireless system. In a wireless system, the longer message you send, the more problems you will have. So specifically in connected vehicles, the bandwidth is quite limited. It's regulated by FCC, and FCC has not allocated a large bandwidth. So I wish FCC would allocate larger bandwidth so don't deal with this very constrained problem. But the reality is that FCC not only expanded this bandwidth, but actually reduced that bandwidth. And so once we have a congested spectrum, meaning that many vehicles would send messages, we will have medium congestion. We might have a lot of hidden terminal problems in such a network. And at the end, we will have increased packet loss. This is particularly important when we are thinking about dense environments like highways or large cities. And in many of the cases that actually this technology, B2B communication, is going to be life-saving. So imagine all these vehicles want to send messages, even our partially hybrid solution, and they would create a lot of collisions. So if you want to measure that in terms of frame loss rate, we define this metric FLR, frame loss rate. Even with Falcon, which appears to be the most promising one, in high density scenarios, frame loss rate could be up to 63% more than when you use ECDSA. And losing even a fraction of a certificate means that those BSMs cannot be used, and those BSM won't be able to help the vehicles to prevent collisions. And that's where we actually realized there is no way but to turn to AI to help with this situation. So cryptography is not enough. Even fragmentation is not enough. We have to think of an additional solution. And that's where we look into optimizing transmission using AI. With some experiments, it turns out that in today's V2V technology, more than 95% of transmission certificate transmissions are unnecessary. It's because, if I go back to this example here, so when the vehicles are, moving in the same direction, more or less, they would keep having similar neighbors, right? So when they have similar neighbors or the same neighbors, a similar set of neighbors, if they exchange the certificate once, they don't need to keep exchanging that certificate. The certificate are needed to verify a signature. So if I share the certificate with my neighbors once, and they gonna stay around for a while, I don't need to keep sending the same certificate to them. In other words, vehicles do not move very far within that period of 500 milliseconds. So that led us to the idea of, okay, well, can we send certificates less frequently if the vehicle realizes using AI that the environment has not changed much? So it needs to learn about the environment, about the vehicles, the identity of the vehicles, the speed of the vehicles, how far or how wide or narrow the road is, and so on and so forth, to decide whether it can less frequently transmit or has to send more frequently. And then we proposed a distributed AI to dynamically adjust certificate intervals. So again, the vehicle turns to be an intelligent vehicle, tries to learn about its environment, neighbors, and the level of congestion on that limited bandwidth, and accordingly decides about how fast or how frequently it has to transmit the certificates. And that's what we got really to for our, achieve our goal to make this system practical. So to evaluate that, we conducted extensive experiments, first in simulations using the software called Veins. We added Veins is for transportation and connected vehicles. We added a custom module for post-quantum V2V into that, and consider or experimenting on dense networks or dense roadways, as you can see in the picture. We also benchmark our algorithms and solutions on an ARM-based V2V chipset. It's a chipset that is used today, or at least the latest chipset that is used by auto manufacturers for testing V2V protocols. And further conducted some experiments using software-defined radios, specifically USRPs, in the lab, and then on real roadways. Basically, we did on the RIT campus, which was a limited but real roadway test bed. And again, we released the code for the community with our test bed called PQ, or post quantum V2 verifier. So the results are promising. And I skipped the security proofs for the interest of time. I just look at some of the experimental results. So if you look at the table, when we did not use our AI solution, the increase in the delay, the first row, and increase in the frame loss rate, the second row, was measured. So the increase in the delay was not significant. It was more or less negligible, a fraction of a millisecond, which would not impact the safety of the application. So that was a success. But in terms of frame loss rate, without the AI protocol, we saw a significant increase in packet loss. But once we applied our AI approach for optimally using the spectrum and optimally designing the frequency of sending BSMs or the certificates, we reduced the frame loss rate significantly. And now, compared to the classical system, the frame loss rate is only about maybe 8%, 7-8% more, which is very moderate and acceptable frame loss rate, and that makes the solution practical. So yes, that was some of the research findings we had, and basically just to highlight a few key points. As I discussed in using two examples, one is IKE protocol and the second is V2V protocol. Constraint networks cannot yet fully adopt post-quantum solutions. If they want to adopt fully post-quantum solution, there will be significant performance degradation. So there should be solutions to this problem. Of course, we wait for NIST and cryptographic community to come up with better algorithms. But as long as we use the same algorithm as today, there appears that there is no way but to fragment the messages into, or the packets into multiple packets. But then we probably, as I discussed, we should not only use some partial hybrid authentication, at least for the next few years, but also use AI, for example, to optimize the spectrum use on the network side. So we have to look at both aspects, the security side and the network and system side, in order to make these systems work. And one of our also key takeaways is that perhaps Falcon is the most promising post-quantum algorithm for V2V and many others. And again, we hope to see better algorithms in next few years. Yes, thank you very much. My name is Hanif Rabari, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for the fantastic presentation. I appreciate it. So we'll leave the Q&A session. So folks who has questions, please put it on the chat. I would appreciate the questions. Maybe I'll get started with when you looked at this low density and high density criteria, did you also consider these environmental conditions, in terms of your requirements for latency and network constraints? Is that was taken into consideration for this latency calculations, or is it, I'm just curious to see, or it's not part of or ideally it's under ideal conditions you are referring to these numbers?
Yes, so the main criteria we look at is how dense the environment is and how good the communication channel is. So we looked at the modulation schemes that the vehicles use, because that is an indication of how good the channel is, and also the number of such vehicles and the speed of such vehicles. So these parameters were the things we use in the training of the algorithms, and so we train the algorithms. Okay, under which configurations we can transmit more often, under which concentration we have to transmit less often, and so that's basically what we train the algorithm based on, and at the same time. So yes, we know that that's a constraint, that we really want to send the certificate no later than half a second or 500 milliseconds, unless the environment is still composed of the vehicles that I saw half a second ago or 1 second ago. So looking at that, making sure that we don't lose vehicles, or we don't ignore the new vehicles in the vicinity, is of course also part of that. So so there's a protocol called P2PCD. That's why I bring back this slide. It's used in V2V for when a vehicle expects the certificate, doesn't receive that certificate, or doesn't, and then ask its neighbors whether or not you have that. So that also helps with making sure that there is no vehicle that is waiting for the certificate, but we don't rely on that protocol, mainly because that protocol, sending post-quantum certificate using that protocol, would create even more traffic. So we try to use that as the last resort, mainly try to have the vehicle send the certificates on time, but not on redundant certificates, so that everyone can basically gets a fair share of the spectrum.
Super. I have a follow-up question. I think this makes sense, your argument of, 95% certificate is unnecessary, right? And where do you think this LLMs or AI's role, both it will reside on the certificate authority as well as also on the vehicle, or uh, what are you thinking in terms of leveraging AI and to make sure that maybe it resides on both vehicle as well as maybe, whoever's authority is providing these certificates, right? And also, what are the implications of attacks using AI itself, so can you shed some light on that aspect?
Yeah, so some great but significant questions. Sure. So first of all, it's a so learning on the vehicle side, like using AI for learning on the vehicle side, is as we showed, can help. Is not like an sort of intuitive way of using AI in connected vehicle for security of V2V, but it turns out that not using AI would not even help us to adopt these techniques or these security techniques. So in this way, I say we use AI for security. Part of your question is that, okay, how about the security of AI, which is the relevant, valid, and important question, of course. So in another research track of mine that I did not cover in this, we look at the poisoning attacks or evasion attacks against AI models that are used in wireless systems. And then, one high-level approach we are using, and we have some published papers on that, is that the AI models, or sometimes we focus more specifically on deep learning on that research track, they have to keep changing their parameters like a moving target so that the attackers will try to attack these AI systems and try to learn what these AI systems do not have enough time to learn and attack the system. So by the time they are going to learn the system needs to adapt or change, at least change some of the parameters or change some of the models, so that doesn't give enough time for the attackers to learn those behavior or those parameters or those models, and then launches like poisoning or evasion attacks. So that's a valid area to focus on. But going back to AI for security or AI for V2V, so I see there is more potential of having more intelligence in the vehicles. So like the expansion of what I explained in the talk, that the more the vehicles learn about this environment, the other vehicles, the parameters of other vehicles, perhaps maybe 1 mile ahead, 1 mile behind. The more they learn about the environment, they can do better. They can be more efficient, and perhaps it's the only way to go to support some of the applications, including post-quantum. As per the LLMs, that's I think I mean we have to be a little bit careful about how easily can LLM transit from the, let's say, in NLP to areas like this. But specifically in terms of connected vehicles or V2V, as the vehicles are moving sort of in a sort of more predictable manner, there is some dependency over time about where the vehicles are and their environment. So there are potential on using LLMs on that regard, because it can help to look at some practical or some historical trends, and then use that to use this time dependency to predict the next state of the system. And so again, that turns out to be strong enough, can help vehicles make even more optimized decisions in cases that the movement of the vehicle can be somewhat predictable.
Super. Thank you again for the detailed explanation. Okay, we get some questions here. What strategies do you recommend for transitioning from current elliptic curve-based cryptographic systems to post-quantum secure systems in V2V communication, ensuring backward compatibility and interoperability during the transition period?
So two main points, and great question. First, we have to keep supporting hybrid solutions. And it is not just for V2V, for nearly all the systems, we have to support a hybrid solution. What I mean by hybrid, again, going back to some of the definitions. So hybrid, so here's a partially hybrid, but it carries the point. So we should not abandon ECDSA. So ECDSA is going to be vulnerable to quantum attacks, but it has been it has been tested and proven to be very strong against classical computers. So it's very important to keep it. And that's why we also keep it in our solution. And in any solution, should we keep it because who knows, maybe the researchers or the cryptographers or cryptanalysts realize that one of those post-quantum algorithms is broken, is vulnerable. And so we don't want to lose at least the security of today. So that's one main thing. We have to have a hybrid solution. And again, it goes beyond just B2B. Second thing, and I jump to my last slide. The second main point or approach is that, it turns out that we cannot avoid having fragmentation. So fragmentation in networks like, IP or IKE or V2V appears to be inevitable. So we have large signatures or certificates. There is no way but to support this, but to fragment that. So fragmentation, and that's across nearly all the protocols I have seen people have developed or we develop in my team. So that's the second thing we have to do. But fragmentation is not enough. So we also have to, see, okay, well, sometimes we have to have partially hybrid solutions because, if you want to have all those elements fragmented, it would not be practical. So we have to at least support the most eminent or the most critical elements. We have to protect the most critical elements first until we have maybe, let's say, FCC allows more bandwidth, or maybe NIST comes up with better algorithms. So until then, we have to have at least some protection of the most critical part of the message. So that's another approach. And lastly, to make this system practical, especially in V2V, we need to rely on AI to help us make more intelligent decisions. So the main solution is having a fragmentation with partially hybrid or hopefully hybrid solution. But in order to make that practical, I think we need to rely or use AI to make more intelligent decisions on how frequent transmit, when transmit, what should be transmission parameters. If you know about wireless, what should be transmit power, what should be the modulation scheme, what should be the frequency of transmission, how frequently transmit. So these are I guess, the main approaches that we have to adopt to make this transition.
Speaking on that fragmentation, help me here in the 5-message cycle that you talked about, that you came up with that optimal number, or is it something that you did some trial and error, and then you think that's the appropriate for this particular study?
Yeah, great question. We actually have been discussing that with my student for a while. So it turns out that in the transportation community, they see that 500 millisecond as still safe enough, meaning that it's still fast enough. So that's mainly the number coming from that side. So my student sometimes questions that why exactly 500, whether the transportation folks optimized, done any optimization problem and came up with that. But it turns out this is more of a rule of thumb. Like,
Sure.
if you send them as late as 500 milliseconds, you are still fine, meaning that the driver who's making decision, or in near future, the autonomous vehicle who makes a decision, that gives either the driver or the autonomous vehicle enough time to react. So it's a sort of more a standard industry standard, or is the industry accepted threshold for
In
that.
your
We've done that.
Great. In your study, correct me, if a particular vehicle loses the communication channel, do you assume that you still use the same certificate, or do you initiate a new certificate? Is that something, That's one question. Then I have a follow-up question that people are asking here. Given the timing constraints of V2X and V2V, how do the signature verification time of post-quantum algorithms affect message delays in safety critical scenarios? Maybe it's kind of related. Yeah.
Yes, all very good questions. So let me start with the last one, which is quicker. So we initially thought that generation and verification of certificates or signatures is going to be significant barrier in V2V. So we initially started our research on that, but it turns out that it is not as significant as the communication cost or transportation or transmission cost. So there is some delay because of that, but it is not. It is sort of insignificant compared to the transmission cost. But back to the first question. So if a vehicle, so if I'm a sending vehicle and I lose my certificate, I have to, or maybe my certificate is compromised. I have to go back if I realize that if I have to go back to the CA and ask for a new certificate or wait for the validity period of that certificate before I switch to a different certificate. And there are different schemes, but these are all based on the assumption that the system or the sender would realize that its certificate has been compromised. If not, the attacker could use that or could compromise that without anyone realizing that it would send bogus messages and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's why. But it is because you mentioned certificate forgery is imminent. I was wondering in what scenarios that is actually more prevalent, to see whether is it during the loss of certificate or, yeah.
Yes,
Interesting.
so to be more precise, so each vehicle is provisioned with a large number of certificates. So it keeps
Correct.
changing those certificates, but this the certificate is going to be valid for 1 week. So that one validity, if I'm an attacker, I know that the certificate is going to be valid for 1 week. Other vehicles don't know about my other certificate, so I can keep using that for a whole 1 week to generate bogus traffic.
Super. I think I don't see any more questions, but I think it's very interesting. A lot of open-ended questions that, do you have any last advice for grad students or postdocs or faculty who are listening here? Anything that you want to close the thoughts to see what, any particular problems that you, or the recommendations for them to look at the type of questions?
Yes, of course. No, first of all, again, thanks for having me. A couple of quick points. And if you are interested in this domain of vehicles, there is also an important element called human driver, or in maybe a decade, the AI driver. So that needs to be also taken into account, and that's something I'm looking into. But it cannot be ignored. It's an important, like human-centric sort of, security. The second thing is, I think practicality of a solution is critical. So that's, I guess, one of the main message I try to convey here is that just looking at, let's say, cryptography, just looking at some proofs, while important, but it's not enough to make a solution practical. That's the message we communicate to NIST, saying that, okay, these algorithms are great, but look, some of them are not practical. They cannot be used. They are non-starters. So paying attention to the practicality of any solution is critical.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate and hopefully, we'll see some interesting follow-up work coming up from your group, and we're excited to follow on. Thank you so much for your time this morning, and we'll be in touch, and you'll receive a nice certificate and plaque from UND, and hopefully we have a chance to meet, and maybe we can visit UND, or maybe I can see a chance to visit RIT. Yeah, thank you,
Yes, you're
Dr.
certainly welcome. Yes. Great. Again, thanks for having me. Enjoy this conversation.
Take
All the
care.
best.
Bye.